Oh, right. I've been feeling a bit rough today, so it's been a slow one. Um, okay. I started looking at writing the Gittier formula, and then I got to thinking, by virtue of the fact, okay, I looked at a template. Have I still got it up? Probably not. For Gittier formula, using Cookie Cutter. I quite like Cookie Cutter. It's got a lot of powerful features, and it sort of blends in with my general philosophy of, as much as possible, providing support for developers by providing them with pre-configurations that are easy enough to set up. So, for example, in this instance, I'm setting up virtual machines that a developer can use for as a development environment. Without the need for a lot of work on their part. They literally just fire up a virtual machine with all of the stuff pre-configured, and then put the individual project files that they're working on in there. The point being that if they get their if they get into trouble, all they need to do basically is make sure their personal work is stored, say in a Git repository, and then reset the virtual machine and start again. So it doesn't matter if they install stuff or screw up the configuration in some way. It's easy enough to reset. It also means that they can work on multiple machines, and they can know that by running inside the virtual machine, they're always going to have a consistent configuration. It also means it's easy enough to deploy updated configurations. So as the project proceeds, and you discover that, oh, maybe I ought to update the underlying operating system, update the tool set, it's easy enough to do if you've got a common understanding about the configuration. You can just send out a new virtual machine, they can transition their files from one VM to the other, and they're off again. And the same applies for using tools like Cookie Cutter, where it provides a consistency to the way projects are set up. If you say to an organization, look, you've got two choices. I'm not going to stop you from setting up your project any way you like, but here is an organization-wide standard that we know works. And you can refine that over the years, producing a project setup that basically pre-configures everything. Now, as a developer, my attitude is always I'm going to take the path of least resistance. And if somebody's already done all the hard lifting, the heavy lifting of configuring everything for me, I'm going to use that, because the alternative is I set it up myself and then find that for some reason I can't get it into an official pipeline, or I can't, I suddenly have to do a lot more work than if I just use a cookie cutter solution, as in the broad cookie cutter solution, that is the organization-wide standard. I think it's a bad idea for organizations to mandate, you will do it this way, or have, an official downstream pipeline, other than if they're well established, of course. But, if you're talking about a new project and a new setting, you can have constraints to say, you must have a certain degree of testing or a certain level of testing. You must have a certain amount of, I don't know, quality checking, whatever. The point being that there's a difference between having a policy that says your project must meet these criteria in a sort of guideline sense, and mandating you will use this tool, you will use it in the following way. That second one, I think, is too oppressive. and it stifles innovation. Whereas if you just set the boundaries and you say, within these boundaries, for example, you must have full API documentation is a perfectly reasonable policy. How you produce that documentation, I don't give a damn. I might say at the end of it, you must have a website with your documentation on. Again, I don't care how you do that. All I care about is that anyone who wants to consume your API can go to the website and see the full set of documentation. How you produce that, entirely up to you. That said, as a developer, if somebody says to me, here are the guidelines, oh, and by the way, if you just type this command in on the command line, it will set you up a project that meets all of those guidelines, I'm going to use it unless I've got a really compelling reason not to. So, okay, so that's where we're at. So, coming back to my original train of thought, I was talking about using cookie cutter to produce this formula. So I'd got this formula and I produced from the template, I produced a project. And I looked at it and I wasn't particularly happy. Well, that's fine because you can change the cookie cutter template to meet your requirements. And when I started looking at it, I thought, this is a long way from where I want to be. So I went and I looked at some of my favorite formulae to see, what needed to be changed. And perhaps I could find out where they'd got their template from. Anyway, it turns out that SaltStack Formula, which is a project on GitHub, an organization on GitHub, has got a thing called the template formula. So I went and had a look at that. And it's got some interesting ideas in it. But on my current reading of it, they've made it much more complex. Not without good reason, I have to say. Okay, so here's the thing. Generally speaking, most formulae, you provide a set of pillar data, and then within the formula, there's a load of ginger, which will then reconfigure it according to whatever the pillar data says. And this is a fairly standard approach. And if you go and look at the SaltStack recommendations, this is broadly what they tell you to do. The point that the authors of this template formula make is that in organizations with very large numbers of minions, this puts a staggering load onto the master. And the reason for that is that all pillar data is initially rendered on the master. So if all of your configuration relies on purely on pillar data, then you're going to have a bad time. So what they say is, well, what we will do then is we'll make it so that the template itself does a lot of the heavy lifting. Okay, and we'll do that by having our, when the template is originally created, we will allow it to construct, from the pillar data, we will construct configuration files, which will then layer on top of the formula. So that when the minion is actually invoked, what it's actually doing is reading data and salt states overridden on top of the formula. Okay, so their argument is that that is more efficient. It pushes or seems to push a lot of the load back onto the minion, because the minion's basically making salt file system requests. I'm not entirely convinced that it's that big a problem for 99.99% of people. And the additional complexity that they introduce into the construction of a formula just strikes me as being a bit weird and a bit much of an overhead. However, never one to diss an idea until I fully understand it. I'm going to give it a bit of a fiddle and think about it. It could be, I think actually that, the Gitia formula is so trivial, it's not going to benefit from this particular thing. And I'm not entirely convinced that there are very many formulae that would benefit from this in reality. But I'm happy enough to dig and keep digging until I fully understand what it is they're trying to do, and then make an informed decision. So anyway, yeah, that was today. Not a huge amount. Like I say, I've not been feeling particularly sparky today. To that end, I'm off. Anyway, TTFN, or see you later. Hey, let's have a 1960s prisoner reference tonight, shall we? Be seeing you.